I was 6.5 months pregnant with twins when a judge told me, flat-voiced like it was paperwork, that I would not be allowed to raise my own children. The moment they're born, he said, custody goes to the father. My name is Sarah Whitmore. Alex's attorney outlined the custody plan with a smug precision that made me want to scream. I remember how the judge nodded along, barely glancing at me. My lawyer, a man I'd chosen because he was affordable, sat beside me, visibly sweating. He mumbled objections the judge brushed off like dust. I realized, sitting in that sterile courtroom, that he was afraid. Not of Alex, of Alex's money, of the judge, of what would happen if he pushed too hard. My heart pounded so loudly it made it hard to hear the final ruling. But it was clear, Alex would take the twins. I would get visitation, eventually, maybe. I remember walking out of that courtroom stunned, humiliated. It felt rehearsed, like they'd all decided this before I ever walked in. If you've ever watched someone twist the system and walk away smiling, and wished you could do something about it, stay with me. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, tap like or subscribe. That's how we fight back. Days passed in a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about how powerless I was. And eventually, when it all got too heavy, I made an appointment at the clinic to end the pregnancy. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the only thing I still had control over. Rain traced lines down my coat like fingers. It soaked into my sleeves, sharp as grief, quiet as shame. The city blurred behind the downpour. Everything felt washed out, except for the choice I was about to make. I stood outside the clinic door for a long time, stomach tight, hand hovering over the handle. And then, "Don't go in there, honey." The voice was low, raspy, almost hard to hear over the rain. I turned and saw an older woman sitting just outside the entrance, bundled in layers of damp clothes. Her face was lined, worn, but her eyes were piercing. She looked straight at me like she already knew everything. She said, "The judge wasn't fair to you. Someone paid him, you know that." And in that moment, something shifted. I had never said those words out loud, not to anyone. I hadn't even dared to think them clearly. But she did, like it was fact. I stepped toward her, heart pounding, but she was already rising, walking away with a strange, graceful urgency. By the time I reached the sidewalk, she was gone, swallowed up by the rain. I stood there for a long time, drenched, stunned. And then I turned, not into the clinic, but away from it. Because someone knew the truth, and I wasn't done yet. Back home, I peeled off my soaked coat, changed clothes, and wrapped myself in a blanket. But the cold wouldn't leave. Not from the rain, from the woman's voice, still echoing like a drumbeat inside my chest. Someone paid him, you know that. It was less what she said than what it made me feel, like someone had finally named the thing I'd been too scared to say, even to myself. The hearing had flattened me, but it was only now, in the silence of my apartment, that I felt what had truly broken. Not my trust in Evan, not even in the system, but in myself. I had spent months questioning my judgment, rewriting memories, downplaying the manipulation. And then one stranger in the rain spoke a single sentence, and it all came roaring back. Not helplessness, clarity. I looked around the apartment. Nothing had changed. Same half-folded laundry, same crib box in the corner, still unopened. But I had changed. That woman's words didn't bring fear. They brought defiance, a whisper that became a roar the longer I sat with it. I moved to the couch, hand resting on my stomach. The twins stirred, light and insistent. I sat on the floor, hand cradling the curve of my belly. One twin kicked, then the other. I whispered, "I'm not done." Not yet, not if I could still protect them. That's when a name surfaced, Monica Fields. We hadn't talked in years, not really, but if there was anyone who could see through the noise, it was her. She always saw through people, even back in college. The idea of calling her made me nervous, but the alternative, doing nothing, felt like surrender. I found her name in my contacts, stared at it, and pressed call, 1 ring, 2. Sarah? Her voice cut through the static, like a rope thrown into water. "Hey," I said, "do you have time to talk?" "Where are you?" "Home." "Good, meet me in 30, Laurel and Pine, I'll be there." She hung up without waiting for a response. And just like that, I had direction. The cafe at Laurel and Pine was almost empty, the kind of place with chipped tile floors and the quiet hum of an espresso machine that made it easy to disappear into a corner. I found a seat near the back, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug, staring at the door. When Monica walked in, it was like the air changed. Same focused eyes, same steady stride. She spotted me instantly, pulled me into a quick hug that was more stabilizing than comforting. "Sarah," she said quietly, "start from the top," and I did. At first, I wasn't sure how much to say, but once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told her everything. Alex's manipulation, his threats, how he'd treated the pregnancy like leverage. "He never wanted children when we were together," I told her. "But when I left, when the pregnancy became real, he changed. Custody became a weapon. Not parenting, just punishment." How quickly the court had ruled. How my lawyer barely tried. And then finally about the woman at the clinic. She just said it. Like it was fact. "The judge wasn't fair to you. Someone paid him." Monica didn't flinch. She just sat back and tapped her finger once against her coffee cup. "Leonard Briggs," she said slowly. "He's had complaints before." I froze. Complaints? Nothing proven, nothing that stuck, but enough whispers, enough inconsistencies that some of us have been watching him for a while. My stomach twisted. I thought I was losing my mind. "No," Monica said, leaning in. "You're not crazy, but you're in deep, and you're going to need help." I stared at her. "What kind of help?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notepad, scribbled a name. "Claire Donovan," she said. "Family law, not cheap, not timid. She's taken on worse and won. She'll believe you. She'll know what to do." I nodded, holding the name like a lifeline. Monica looked at me, her voice soft but firm. "I can't launch a full investigation into a judge without cause, but I can look around, quietly. I'll help however I can." For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not just hope, direction. The law office didn't look like much from the outside. No glass walls, no marble floors, no intimidating assistants. Just a brass plaque, "Claire Donovan, Family Law." Inside, it smelled like paper and coffee. A young receptionist greeted me with a quiet smile and ushered me into a private office. Claire Donovan stood the moment I walked in. Late 30s, sharp eyes, calm presence. She didn't waste time. "Sarah," she said, shaking my hand. "Monica told me just enough to know we need to talk." I nodded, sat down, and started from the beginning, again. The court hearing, Alex's smugness, the way Judge Briggs barely looked at me, my lawyer's fear, the eerie silence that followed the ruling, and then, finally, the woman outside the clinic. Claire listened without interrupting. Occasionally, she asked precise questions, dates, quotes, details. Her pen moved steadily across a yellow notepad, not hesitating once. When I finished, she looked up and said 3 words that almost made me cry. "You're not wrong," I blinked. "I'm not?" "No, judicial bias is hard to prove, but what you're describing, it's a pattern, and it's too consistent to ignore." She pulled a few documents from a folder, laid them out carefully. "Here's what we're going to do." I leaned forward, every nerve in my body on edge. "First, we file an appeal. That alone stops Alex from steamrolling the custody terms. It gives us time." I nodded. "Second, we request a judicial review. That forces an independent look at Judge Briggs's record. Monica says there's smoke. If we find fire, it changes everything." "Monica mentioned prior complaints," I said quietly. "Exactly," Claire replied. "Third, we push for full financial disclosure from Alex, bank records, transfers, hidden assets. If he bought influence, we'll find the paper trail." I swallowed hard. I'd seen the watch, the new car, the things he brushed off as business perks. "And finally," Claire said, "we request a proper custody evaluation. Real doctors, real assessments, your stress, your pregnancy complications, Alex's threats, it all goes in." She sat back, her eyes unwavering. "This won't be easy, but it's not impossible." I took a breath that felt like the first real one in months. "He'll push back." "He already is," Claire said calmly. "But we'll go step by step. If he gets aggressive, it only helps your case." An assistant came in with a contract. Claire slid it across the desk. "Review it. Ask anything. We can start today." I read every line, hands trembling. And then I signed. The next few days passed in a haze of waiting. Claire filed the motions quickly, each one a quiet threat to the carefully stacked cards Alex had built. The appeal, the judicial review, the financial disclosure request, all were in motion now. That's when Alex started showing up. The first time, it was a knock at the door just past midnight. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. His voice came through the wood like smoke. "You're ruining everything, Sarah. You don't know what you're doing." I pressed my back to the wall and stayed silent. The next day, he left a voicemail. The tone was lighter, mocking, almost amused. "You can barely keep yourself together," he said. "You think a judge is going to hand you children in that condition?" I forwarded it to Claire. Then came the message that made my hands shake. Calm, clear, cruel. "I'll tell the court you're mentally unfit. I'll make them listen." That one I saved twice. My body started reacting before my mind could. Sharp cramps, deep aches, short waves of pressure that had me gripping counters and catching my breath. I tried to tell myself it was normal pregnancy discomfort. But one night, I bent over the kitchen sink, gasping as pain shot down my back. I called the nurse hotline, barely able to speak. 2 days later, I was in a hospital bed at Legacy Good Samaritan. Monitors strapped to my stomach, nurses watching the readouts with furrowed brows. "You need to rest," one of them said, gently but seriously. "Your stress levels are too high. You're at risk for preterm complications. No lifting, no conflict, no drama." I wanted to laugh. No conflict? I told Claire everything. The threats, the midnight visit, the hospital. She didn't flinch. "This is why we press forward. His behavior is escalating, and that makes him look worse, not better." Her voice was steady, but mine wasn't. "What if he doesn't stop?" Claire folded her hands. "Then we document every voicemail, every message, every time he shows up. You're not alone in this." I nodded, even though the fear inside me was starting to fray the edges of my resolve. My body was telling me something, a warning I couldn't afford to ignore. The days that followed moved with sharp purpose. Claire and Monica met every morning like it was a war briefing. Claire highlighted lines from the custody transcript. Every ruling Briggs had made, without basis, every objection brushed aside. She cross-referenced timestamps with court audio, building a timeline of bias too consistent to ignore. Monica worked the financial trail, wire transfers, dummy companies, shell accounts registered to silent partners, all pointing back to Alex's firm and Briggs's family trust. They weren't just preparing evidence, they were constructing a mirror, one that would force the court to look at itself. I sat with them, taking notes, listening, watching the case take shape around me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a client. I felt like a mother defending her daughters with an army at her back. We were ready. And this time, they'd have to listen. Claire walked beside me through security, calm and precise as always. I held my coat closed with one hand and kept the other on my stomach. The twins shifted lightly, a quiet reminder that every step I took now was for them. Inside the courtroom, Alex was already seated, impeccable suit, relaxed posture, smug half-smile. His attorney whispered something to him that made him chuckle. I sat down and felt my hands start to tremble. Then Judge Leonard Briggs entered. He adjusted his glasses, looked over the room, and lingered just a fraction of a second too long on Claire. Claire rose before anyone could speak. "Your Honor, before any custody matters proceed, I am filing a motion for judicial recusal due to conflict of interest." The words landed like a dropped stone. Alex's head snapped toward her. His attorney straightened sharply. Judge Briggs blinked, then narrowed his eyes. "Ms. Donovan," he said coolly, "this court has no reason to entertain baseless accusations. You are out of line." "With respect," Claire replied, her tone unwavering. "The motion is supported by documented irregularities in your prior rulings, financial inconsistencies, and undisclosed associations relevant to this case." Gasps fluttered from the gallery. Alex's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a stunt, a smear tactic. Ms. Whitmore is manufacturing a conspiracy to stall a losing case." Claire didn't even glance at him. "The records speak for themselves," she said. "Until they are reviewed by an impartial body, proceeding would violate my client's right to a fair hearing." I stared at the back of her coat, stunned. No one had ever stood up for me like that, not in court, not with this much clarity. Judge Briggs leaned forward slowly. His jaw was tight, his fingers clenched on the bench. "Ms. Donovan," he said, voice dropping, "if you think you can walk into my courtroom and impugn my reputation—" "If there is no conflict, Your Honor," Claire interrupted, "then transparency should pose no threat." The silence that followed wasn't just tense, it was dangerous. Briggs's lips thinned, his eyelids twitched, the smallest crack, in a carefully constructed mask. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "The court will take the motion under advisement." He hadn't dismissed it. He hadn't crushed it. He hadn't dared. Claire nodded once. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the rest of the hearing dissolved into dates and filings, I felt something new. Power shifting. A crack had opened, and we had just stepped through it. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with Monica's name. I answered immediately. "Monica, I've got something," she said quietly. "Not official, not yet, but it's serious." My pulse jumped. "What is it?" I dug into financial records, cross-referenced Briggs with some real estate acquisitions. There's a shell company, Pine Ridge Consulting, registered to no one, no employees, just movement. Large sums in, small sums out. One of those payments ties directly to a developer Alex's firm works with. I went still. You're telling me there's money connecting Alex to the judge? There's no smoking gun, she said, but there's a loaded clip and powder burns. I closed my eyes, my hand instinctively resting on my stomach. There's one more thing, Monica added. A contact of mine, Sergeant Emily Harper. She's with Internal Affairs now, but she used to work white-collar crime. I passed the company name to her, off the record. She didn't say much, but she didn't laugh either. That landed harder than I expected. Someone official had seen the same cracks. Maybe we weren't imagining it. Maybe the system wasn't ignoring us, just waiting for proof. Don't thank me yet, Monica cut in, gently. This is just the beginning, and Sarah, be careful. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Later that afternoon, I sat in Claire's office as she read through the outline Monica had sent. Her eyes moved fast, focused. This, Claire said finally, is the leverage we needed. You can use it? I asked, hope and fear winding together in my voice. I can incorporate it, she corrected. It's not proof, but it's a wedge. We'll use it to demand transparency and reopen the case. I nodded, breath shaky. Claire opened a new motion draft, judicial review, motion for reconsideration, emergency petition for custody reassessment. Each one carried the quiet, controlled pressure of a woman who knew exactly where to push, but as we moved forward, Alex did too. The next night, he was outside again. This time he didn't knock. He just stood there, staring. The lights from the hallway casting a shadow that stretched across my floor. I didn't move, I didn't speak. But I picked up my phone and hit record. By the end of that week, the rain barely stopped, and I barely slept. Every message from Alex, every unexpected noise outside my door, felt like a trap waiting to spring. My body was unraveling under the weight of it. It started as a dull ache. Then came the cramping, deep, hot, low in my belly. I kept trying to push through it, breathe, rest, hydrate, but nothing helped. One night around 2 a.m., I jolted awake with a sharp pain that took my breath away. This wasn't stress anymore. This was labor, too early. I tried to stand and nearly collapsed. The pain radiated down my back and through my hips. I leaned against the wall, sobbing, whispering to my girls inside me, "Not yet, please, not yet." A neighbor heard the thud and called 911. Paramedics arrived fast. I remember the ambulance lights blurring through tears. One of them held my hand. "You're okay, Sarah. Stay with us." I nodded, or tried to. I don't remember the ride, only the quiet panic running through my veins. At Legacy Good Samaritan, nurses moved around me quickly, attaching monitors, checking vitals. The twin heartbeats were fast, but steady. Mine wasn't. A resident came in, calm but serious. "You're in early labor. We're going to try to slow it down, but we need to get you upstairs." I barely had time to answer before they wheeled me into labor and delivery. Pain surged again, hotter, sharper. I gripped the rails, teeth clenched. I was terrified. They weren't ready. I wasn't ready. They wheeled me into the hallway, fluorescent lights flickering above me, the wheels squeaking beneath the gurney. As we turned the corner toward labor and delivery, I glanced toward the waiting room and froze. A woman stood just outside the automatic doors, coat soaked, still as stone, just watching. Same build, same profile, same coat. I blinked. A nurse pushed the gurney forward. By the time I turned my head again, the doors had closed. She was gone. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was just the rain playing tricks. But for one strange second, I felt steadier. not because I was safe, but because I wasn't alone. Claire arrived at the hospital just as they were prepping the delivery room. She had come straight from the courthouse, still in heels, still holding her case files. "Briggs just tried to ambush us," she said quickly. "Filed an emergency hearing to push the case through before the review." I stared at her, tears rolling down. "I can't go." "You don't need to," Claire said, squeezing my hand. "They called a recess, and then," she paused, "they suspended him, Sarah." Mid-hearing, the clerk walked in and whispered something. Briggs stormed off. Minutes later, it was official. "He's under investigation." My breath caught. It didn't feel real. He was gone. The man who tried to take everything from me had finally been stopped. Then the next contraction hit. Hard, brutal, final. The nurses moved fast. There was no more waiting, no more planning. Labor came like a flood. And hours later, through tears, pain, and every ounce of strength I had left, I heard the sound I had been aching to hear for months. A cry, then another, 2 cries, small and thin, but alive. My daughters. Tiny, beautiful, furious at the world already. The NICU team moved quickly, placing them into incubators. Their skin was translucent, their limbs impossibly small. But when they cried, it was fierce. A sound too big for bodies so new. "Fighters," the nurse had said. And I believed her. I caught a glimpse, fingers no bigger than matchsticks, eyes closed tight. A nurse leaned over and whispered, "They're fighters." I nodded, exhausted, broken open in a way I had never known. But they were here, and I was still standing. 2 weeks later, I sat in a wheelchair, flanked by 2 women who had carried me through the storm, Claire and Monica. The Multnomah County Courthouse looked different this time. Not because the building had changed, but because the man who once held power inside it was gone. Judge Briggs's name had been removed from the docket. In his place sat Judge Miriam Caldwell, a woman known for fairness, and more importantly, for being unshakable. Her presence felt steady, grounded, the kind of authority you didn't fear but trusted. "Good morning," she said, her tone measured but clear. "We are reopening this custody case due to procedural irregularities and newly submitted evidence." For the first time, I felt the courtroom tilt back toward center. Claire stood, her voice was surgical. Witnesses came next, a neighbor who had seen Alex lurking at night, a nurse from Legacy who overheard him speaking aggressively during one of his visits, a friend who had stopped calling because she was afraid for me. Then came the financial documents. Pine Ridge Consulting, the shell company Monica and Emily traced back to payments aligned with favorable rulings. The quiet transfers from developers to accounts tied to Judge Briggs's family. Claire explained it all with quiet force. "Not proof of guilt," she said, "but proof of enough impropriety to call every decision into question." Alex's attorney tried to object, but his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. Even Alex himself looked smaller now, his jaw clenched, his suit a little too perfect, as if trying to cling to the image of control. Then Claire presented my medical records, the stress-induced complications, the hospital warnings, the premature labor, everything I'd endured while Alex harassed and threatened and watched. "This isn't just a custody dispute," she said, her voice low. "It's endangerment, sustained, intentional, and damaging." Judge Caldwell sat still for a long moment, then finally turned to Alex. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "do you wish to respond?" He stood, hands slightly shaking. "All of this is exaggerated," he said. "She's emotional, she's unstable, she's trying to paint me as a monster." Claire didn't even rise. "The recordings speak for themselves," she said quietly. The judge nodded once and then delivered the ruling. In the interest of the children's safety and well-being, full physical and legal custody is granted to Ms. Sarah Whitmore. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Caldwell continued, "supervised visitation only, and any prior rulings issued under the authority of Leonard Briggs are hereby vacated pending full investigation." In the gallery, phones buzzed. A news alert was going out. Claire looked at her phone and whispered, "Briggs is being charged, 3 felonies. Alex went pale. I didn't move. I didn't celebrate. I just sat in my chair and finally breathed. The fight was over, and I had won. A week later, I got one last voicemail from Alex. Not angry, not cruel, just quiet, deflated. "Sarah, I don't know what you told them. I don't know how you twisted it. But this isn't what I wanted." His voice cracked. The first time I'd ever heard that happen. "I just wanted to fix things. But you made me look like a monster." He paused, like he expected me to interrupt. But it was a recording. There was no one on the other end. "I loved you once," he said finally, "even if you don't believe that." Then silence. I didn't save it. Didn't send it to Claire. I just deleted it. Because it didn't matter anymore. 10 years passed like a slow exhale. The winters in Portland were still cold, still rainy, but the world I lived in now was quiet, soft. My home sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees that turned deep red in the fall. Wind chimes hung from my porch, catching the faintest breeze. Inside, laughter echoed, steady and warm. My daughters were 10 now, identical in looks, but wildly different in spirit. One raced through life, bold and quick. The other was quieter, always observing. Both were bright, kind, and strong, in ways I could never fully explain or take credit for. They remembered the early years only in pieces, and I let them keep it that way. I worked part-time at a local education center, teaching literacy to new parents and volunteering for food drives when I could. My life was calm, ordinary, intentional, and I liked it that way. Monica became family, brunch every other Sunday. Casual text threads filled with memes, recipes, and headlines that made us both groan. Emily Harper stayed in touch too, usually brief updates, always kind. The Briggs scandal had faded from the news, but his name never quite disappeared. His fall was long and public. The investigation had exposed more than just Alex. Entire networks of quiet corruption collapsed behind him. As for Alex, he became a shadow. Supervised visits faded. The girls stopped asking for him. He showed up less and less, always under someone's eye, always performing. Over time, even he seemed to understand that whatever hold he thought he had was gone. He lived in a modest apartment on the west side now. His development firm was still standing, but it wasn't what it used to be. His charm didn't land the way it once had. He was just irrelevant. Every now and then, I thought about that rainy morning outside the clinic, about the woman, the stranger who saw through everything and gave me just a sentence that changed the course of my life. I never found her again. No one else remembered seeing her. No shelters had her name. No camera ever caught her face. But one night, near the girl's 10th birthday, I dreamt of her. We were standing in a misty field. She looked older, softer, her coat the same. Her eyes still sharp. She asked, "Did you find your way?" And in the dream, I only nodded. When I woke up, the wind chimes were tapping softly outside. The house was quiet. My daughters slept peacefully in their rooms, and I whispered into the silence, not to her, not to anyone in particular, just to myself. Yes, I found it. That afternoon, I walked to the corner store for milk. The rain had started again, not hard, just misting, soft enough to blur the edges of things. As I waited at the crosswalk, I saw a figure ahead, same build, same coat, standing still on the opposite curb. For a second, I held my breath, but when I blinked, she stepped into the crowd and vanished. I didn't chase her, I just smiled, pulled my hood tighter, and crossed the street. Some people show up when you need them, and only then.